Hello and welcome to this episode of FireDEV, a fireside chat with amazing people in the industry. And today I have Morgan Ling with me. Do you want to do a brief introduction, Morgan?
Yeah, for sure. First off, thanks for having me on the pod. I'm really excited. Like Farhan said, I am Morgan Ling. I'm currently a senior product manager at Amazon Games, but previously worked at Riot Games. And as a senior product manager, I basically focus on anything related to engagement, retention, and monetization. So my specialty is in monetization systems designs.
Okay. Before we talk about Riot Games and Amazon, just want to go back a bit. In 2015, you founded a company called Bard Mode, was it? What did that company do?
Oh yeah, that was a a very much so famous company. I am somebody who really likes fashion and I really like anime, and so I thought I would combine my love, but by creating like shirts and hats, basically with different anime characters on it. It did decently well in the beginning, but I didn't put the time, and I don't think I picked the right partner for it. So we actually shut it down after a year. Basically, after we sold out of our inventory, it was pretty tough for us to keep running without having an influx of additional cash. So, not gaming related at all. It was just like an adventure I was starting. I think at that time I had a little bit of money saved up from my internship, and I thought it would be a cool project. So I learned a lot from it, but it definitely failed.
Fair enough. So you was at Mars for over 3 years. What did you do there? And is that Mars as in the chocolate company?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So Mars Wrigley, they make Snickers, M&Ms, Five Gum. They have like a huge array of like top tier brands within the confectionery business. And so I worked there. I worked several different roles, but I think the one that's most notable is that I worked a role within something that they called revenue strategy, and that was towards my end of my time at Mars. And revenue strategy for them, or strategic revenue management, is actually what they called it, was like helping the customers of Mars. So that's like the Walmarts, that's the Walgreens of the world, merchandise their products, figure out like where they should go on the shelf, put things on promotion, put things on end caps. And so you basically help them sell more of the products that you sell to them. And that was like essentially what that role was helping them do.
Okay. And afterwards, you joined Riot Games as a developer. Is that correct?
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how did that transition occur from what I understand, no coding experience, coming from Mars, and a degree in economics and general physics? Because that's not a degree that sounds like you're heavy in C++ or Python or anything like that. So how did that all go down, and why did that transition occur?
Yeah. So during my time at Mars, as much as I really liked candy, I wasn't sure that I wanted to be in that industry long term. And something that I had always loved, I was a gamer from a young age, was video games, right? And so um, I was obviously already familiar with League of Legends, had played that for several years. And so Riot was just kind of the companies that was on my radar of companies that I thought I would be interested in working with. Partially because one, I really loved the game, but two, they had a pretty interesting reputation. And this was a little bit like before the Kotaku article came out too, right? But that's a whole like different story that I'm happy to talk about. And so while I was thinking about what I could do from a career perspective, I was thinking I actually did a bunch of research around the games industry, just to saying, hey, is there anything that's transferable, even if that means I'm not on the like tech or dev side, from a design perspective, maybe, or just even just from a business perspective. That was kind of what I was looking at. What I realized was that there was a role within game development that actually kind of did something similar to what I was doing. And so what I was doing, like I said, with candy was, merchandising them, putting things on promotion, and video games, or specifically live ops video games, do that with virtual content. When you think of like what content is going on the store, when it's going to be presented to you, the pricing of it, like all of those things, I was like, wait a minute, I can definitely do that. Those skills are really transferable, right? And so what I did was I applied to several companies, was lucky enough to get an interview at a couple. Riot was one of them, and I worked really hard during my interviews to convince them that I had monetization design skills. And it helped again that I was a gamer and I was a paying gamer. I played lots of free live ops games. And so I convinced them that what I did with Candy, I could totally do with virtual content, and which I learned was actually in part monetization design. So I decided not to take the path of like learning coding, but going a little bit more of the design route, which is the gaming industry now, devs used to be just more the tech side, but I would say a lot of designers are kind of considered devs as well, at least nowadays. So I convinced them to do that, to hire me. And that's actually where I decided I also learned on the job how to pick up those skills and think through that and actually design like battle passes, design systems in games that you actually see, loot box systems, stuff like that. So I like faked my way through kind of through the interview. I mean, obviously I prepared a lot, did a lot of interviews, chatted with some folks that I knew who were in the industry that were willing to talk to me. And then ever since then, I've been kind of just doing just that.
Okay, so before we move on, just want to touch on that little bit that you said at the start about the Kotaku article. So if you want to just let the audience know about the Kotaku article and how you felt, after that and, going into Riot Games.
Yeah, I believe the Kotaku article came out in 2018, I believe. But it was essentially an article that kind of highlighted some of the issues that we're seeing in the industry altogether, but at specifically Riot, which is around like sexism in the industry. And this was something that unfortunately didn't fully surprise me. I've kind of heard about that. It's also similar in just traditional tech as well. But I think why I decided to still apply to Riot and go through the interview process, was kind of because I was keeping an eye on Riot's response to that Kotaku article, right? And I was actually kind of impressed that they like officially sent out an apology, that they also sent out a 6-month and 1-year plan, that they were documenting publicly what they were doing to change and to make sure that it was a more welcoming, environment. They hired a new DEI director who sat at the C-suite level, and so those were things that I was like kind of keeping an eye on. And the truth is, it's like okay, I expected there was going to be kind of issues related to misogyny or sexism within the industry. I wanted to be part of a place that acknowledged that and was really willing and putting time, effort into making a change. And I saw that from Riot, and I saw that as well when I was going through. They have a particularly long interview process. I think my interview process was several weeks long, but I was unafraid to ask each of the folks that were interviewing me, like, talk to me about this article, talk to me about what's going on, talk to me about like, especially when I had female viewers, I was like, tell me about your experiences here and why you still decided to stay. And everybody was like very open, very honest, and very willing to talk about it with me, which is why I decided to accept the Riot offer once I actually got it.
Okay. And what was so you've touched on the interview process. You said it was multiple weeks long for Riot Games. Like, what sort of things did you do at the different stages? And what advice would you give to someone else looking, to get into a company like Riot Games and also to make that transition? Because Riot Games, unlike Amazon, was the first one that you went into like this. So what was that process like, and what advice would you give someone trying to make some sort of big shift like that?
Yeah. I'm not sure how much I can share specifically about the process or the questions itself, but it does vary depending on which kind of job function or job discipline that you are applying for in the role itself. But generally, I would say, like most folks that I've known to interview at Riot, and I was actually part of the interview process once I had joined a year later, I was interviewing folks. Is usually like several rounds, right? And so sometimes you'll have up to, in terms of video calls or just phone calls, it could be 2, 3, 4 of those before you actually do in person. And obviously during COVID, they did a virtual version of the in person. So what I was applying for specifically was something within what they called the revenue strategy discipline. And so revenue strategy discipline housed most of their like monetization designers, but it also had a lot of like a business aspect to it too. So it was kind of a mix between design and business to some degree, I would say. And so those roles kind of actually tested me on my quant skills. They tested me on, like, they used a bunch of case studies to kind of run through how I would build certain systems within the game, how I would evaluate the game to decide like what was the best way to monetize from it. Like, and so there were, gosh, man, I think mine took 5, 6 weeks long, which is not always the case for everybody, but mine was again quite long in that aspect. And I would say maybe the advice I have that is again a little bit more specific to Riot Games is the importance of being really player focused in your answers. That's like a common theme throughout that resonates really well to the interviewers, is that like when you're thinking about, even if you're trying to make money, right, because sometimes it feels like, oh shit, they're just trying in it for profit. um, it's important to be like, okay, but what does the player actually want? Like, what are they going to enjoy? Like, if you're creating events in game, or if you're creating a season pass or putting a loot box, how do you make sure it's fair? How do you make sure that they're getting value from it? How do you make sure you're communicating what's in the thing and communicating it well through good UI, good through just regular communication systems, right? And so even those aspects of things, you want to tailor and put that into your answer and think deeply through those. And I thought those, I think that's probably what set me apart from other candidates.
Okay, and how did you learn coding? Did you use some sort of coding boot camp or something similar?
Yeah, so I actually don't need to code in my role. That's not the case for everybody. Most designers will use separate tools, but not necessarily need to know like Java, Python, C++, things like that. And so I do know SQL, which is arguably not like a really a coding language, so that I can pull my own data. But that I already had SQL knowledge from prior.
Okay, so it's a designer role with, dev without, any sort of coding. Okay, so over there, and obviously we'll go on to Amazon as well in a second, but over at Riot, is it very common for non-hardcore coders or non-coders to be referred to as devs, either amongst themselves or from other people?
Yeah, so at Riot, they actually consider everybody a dev because they're part of development of the game. Now, that's not normal in the industry. So, like, even if you were in finance, marketing, stuff like that, they would encourage people to call themselves a Riot game dev. Now, when you're talking about like the industry term for game dev, it usually is more consisting of programmers or the software engineer folks. I think I've seen it extend to folks that do design. So it used to be specifically, from my understanding, game dev and then game designer. I've been seeing the term game dev being used to cover both like traditional, like the actual dev person, and the designer who's actually designing the game itself, right? And so that's kind of why I use it pretty loosely, partly because a lot of my behaviors around the industry were shaped by Riot's culture, but also because a lot of just designers call themselves game devs. A lot of live op product managers who manage the life cycle of a game also call themselves game devs. Outside of Riot, though, if you're more like in a business specific role, or like HR, things like that, I don't see folks calling themselves game devs as much, but I do see, again, designers, traditional game devs, like folks part of tech, and then I'll see product managers usually refer to themselves as that.
Yeah, I mean, like you're saying, traditionally when you hear dev or game dev, it's, the C++ coder, the Unity developer, or,
Mm-hmm.
something along those lines. But, when you think about it, they're all developing the, game. I mean, they may not, I think the better distinction would be to not call them a programmer or an engineer, but, a developer, is a correct, I'll say, description, and especially how important stuff like artwork and design and audio is to a game where back in the day the art wasn't as important, and it was really the hardcore coding, and sometimes even the coders would do whip up some art and that was it. But now if you get, let's say, get a game like the League, or GTA or Call of Duty, those big games, they have a lot of coders, and that's very important. They have a lot of designers, a lot of artists, a lot of concept designers, a lot of modelers, a lot of stuff, a lot of people that extend beyond the programmers, and they are instrumental in developing the game. So, what projects did you work on at Riot Games? Was it the core league or was it something else?
Yeah, so I worked within the League of Legends IP. Part of me totally wishes I worked on Valorant because I love that IP, but I never really got the opportunity to do so. So worked within the League of Legends IP, but most notably, I think towards the majority of my tenure there and towards the end, I had actually helped them build out their single player gaming portfolio, which I thought was a really cool and unique opportunity and something I was super excited to do. And so that was where Riot was actually partnering with usually indie game developers to develop other games within the IP of League of Legends. And again, these are all like going to be single player, story driven games of like various genres. And so they've created and published, I think, a few. The Ruined King is one of them. Song of Nunu is either out or about to be out. And so that part I thought was really cool because, with the games that are live at Riot, you're not really part of that early development, right? Unless you're within the R&D division. And so this was a place that I thought I would kind of get that early game dev experience of like, how do you know you're making the right game? How are you designing the right game? And then ultimately, how are you making sure you're pricing the game correctly or inputting like other types of systems design in there that are just right for that game? And so that was a really cool opportunity that honestly taught me like a lot. So that's what I'm particularly proud of working at Riot with.
Okay, so you mentioned that they worked with indie developers. So, what was that sort of process like? Was it indie developers that were known, or they had some, games behind them, or was it ones that were sort of like, anyone can apply as long as you meet certain criteria? Effectively, I guess are a established or big studio, and like, yeah, what was that, and what was the reasoning? As far as you're aware, for going down that route instead of just hiring people, making a separate team with a manager, and just sort of streamlining the process.
Yeah, I would say what we were looking for from these indie game developers was expertise, right? So, yes, we totally could have, I guess, built out our own internal team to make single player games. That it takes time, investment, excuse me, as well. Uh, but it's also we don't have that expertise as much in house, right? Like Riot Games portfolio at that time did not have any type of single player games or any type of like non live ops types of game. That's where their strength really lied, and it would have been an investment to kind of build up a team that had good expertise to do so. So one of the things that we did look at was a track record of success when picking the right partners. And so I think pretty much actually all of the partners had a successful game out there already. And a lot of times we were asked, okay, can you create something similar or like what else are you really good at? Like pitch us that game. There was a lot of freedom I think that the indie game devs had in terms of coming back to us, picking the characters within the IP, and deciding, okay, hey, we think this is the best game, and we want it to feature these league champions, right? And then obviously internally we had a whole evaluation system of whether that was actually the right opportunity for us, whether that met with our goals, things like that. And so I know that was kind of vague because I don't want to say exactly what the strategy was in terms of picking the right partners, but like loosely, we definitely looked at a track record of success versus just anybody coming to us and being like, we can make a game, just trust us.
Okay, and was your role was to that Riot Games? Was that remote, hybrid, on-site working? And what was Riot Games' approach to remote working at the time? Pre-COVID.
Yeah, pre-COVID, if you had a role that was meant to work at headquarters, which a majority of the roles were, it was intended that you be on campus full time. Obviously, every team is a little bit different, and you can work with your manager based off of like your own situation. If maybe you don't come in Fridays, you don't come in Mondays, that's fine. You work that out with your individual manager, but It was a full-time role that was meant to be on campus. Once COVID hit, obviously everybody went to be fully remote, and we were about fully remote for over a year. Gosh, I think almost a year and a half being fully remote. Once everybody started getting vaccinated, slowly and restrictions were being let up. Slowly, they started allowing writers back on campus. They then moved to a hybrid model in which, again, those who were supposed to be at the headquarters would be in the office 3 times a week, usually Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, and then Monday, Fridays they would be work from home. It was really interesting because I think Riot at the time, so this is uh, maybe a year ago now for me, was a little bit of a stickler on keeping to the hybrid. And they wanted folks to come on campus. I think there are a lot of benefits to being with your team in person, so I absolutely see that. But since then, I think they've let up a little bit where it's like there's more flexibility. They would love people to be on campus in a hybrid capacity, but I think they've allowed people to go remote as long as they're living within the area of the campus, so that they can always be called back onto campus if they want to decide to go back to back to hybrid or back to full time. Riot is a little bit more inflexible compared to most of the other companies that I've seen. They might change that. I don't have actually any knowledge or insight if they're going to change that moving forward.
Okay, and how did you personally find that from working in the office and obviously pre-COVID, that was just the normal thing in any company, and I'm sure your Mars job was also on site as well to
Mhm.
having to work because it wasn't a matter of 2 days at home, 3 days in the office, and like you said, office work on-site work does have its advantages. Some people, I know people that rather be in the office. They don't want to work remote. That's not personally. I prefer to work remote, but I know
Yeah.
people that they want to be in the office. So, like, which one do you prefer now that you've done both? And how did that transition for you personally? How did you find that?
Yeah, I'm somebody who loves going into the office and being around a team. I find that I work better with folks. I find that I find more passion into my work when I'm actually working with the teams that I'm supposed to be working with, my stakeholders and my partners. So again, pre-COVID, I was there full time on campus, and Riot Campus, by the way, is freaking gorgeous. Like, it is so cool. They serve breakfast, lunch, and dinners. Like, the place is just designed in a way that's fun and enticing. It's a little bit of a trap. It's very easy to look up, and it's like 7 p.m. So you got to be careful on that one. But there's so much to do there, and people genuinely seem to enjoy being on campus. That being said, I know that that's not a lifestyle that works for everybody right now, and I think it's most important if a company can is to provide flexibility, because I've worked in remote times now. I've seen that a lot of teams are just as productive, sometimes even more, depending on the team, when they're being fully remote. Um, that's less the case for me, to be fully transparent. I think I'm more productive being in office, but only if my team is there. I don't want to be in office if like I'm the only one there. So my current role, for example, is fully remote, but I'm thinking about moving down to the studio when it opens so that I can actually be there in person. So I think the ideal thing is having some sort of hybrid and flexibility to let people go in, and then I would just manage and figure out the best time to go in so that I can match most of my team.
Okay, so when lockdown happened over in your area, and you was forced along with the rest of your teammates to go remote, what was that transition like? Not for you personally, but
Mm.
for Riot. Like, how did they handle that? Because did you already have laptops that you just took home? Did they deliver equipment? Was it literally like lockdowns today and we're starting work, or is there okay? We need a week to sort of get some sort of preparation set up, because it's not just about the equipment; it's about the online software to use, making
Mhm.
sure it can handle hundreds or thousands of people logging in, and all, especially the internal system, because the external systems like Google, Zoom, all that sort of stuff, they're pretty scalable, and that's not stuff that Riot has to worry about. But the internal stuff, like, what was that transition like for Riot, and like what was the time frame from when lockdown hit? And another question: when did lockdown actually occur where you was at Riot?
Yeah, I'll answer the last question first. I want to say that we went, God, fully remote sometime late Q1 2020, maybe like March. I actually don't remember the exact date. And it's tough. I can't speak for every team. I would say for the teams that I was working with and the teams that I was near, transition from a tech perspective was relatively easy. A lot of the folks that I work with have laptops already, and so VPN was set up. All the things they need were most set up. All the tools that they were on that were again already there. So that translation to being fully remote wasn't that difficult. Again, from a tech perspective. Now there are definitely folks who worked on actual desktops and had rigs, and so they needed to get their rigs actually mailed to them. And so that's probably like a different story. But our on-campus team is pretty badass. Like they're pretty on top of it. So I imagine they had a pretty great process in making sure that everybody got shipped the equipment that they need. They were really great about making sure people had peripherals if they needed that. So if we needed extra monitors, extra keyboards, anything like that, a video webcam, right? Like they provided that and they did so. It was very easy to request it. It shipped very quickly. So I never had problems getting the additional stuff that I needed to work. Because, for example, I have really trouble working on one screen. I'm like a 2-3 screen type of girl. So yeah, that I think that part was quite smooth. I think what was difficult, and this is solely based off of my own experience, was just transitioning to remote. I think part of the Riot culture is that it's very collaborative and very social in nature, and you lose some of that when it translates into a fully virtual environment, right? Like it's harder, for me, it was harder to read facial and body language in my meetings. Sometimes people didn't turn on their cameras. And so you're only trying to read the mood based off of like inflections of their voice. And like monitoring that, like even subconsciously, was super tiring for me. And so the transition, not from a tech side to fully remote, was actually quite difficult for me. I think I was depressed for a little bit because I found a lot of passion in my work quite easily when I had first started at Riot, and I had to figure out where that I realized a lot of that passion came from working with people who were amazingly smart, talented, like just wanted to create dope experience in games for players, and that like really excited me. And people didn't lose that, but I had to make sure that I still found that in my work when I was no longer seeing people all the time, when some days I didn't have meetings and I'm just staring at design docs or spreadsheets all day. And so I think that part was like a mental transition of figuring out how can I work remotely and still be really happy and still stay connected to my stakeholders.
Yeah, I think that's a transition that a lot of people, struggled with. Because for me, I have been working remote for years, and like I said, I preferred that. So when COVID hit, from a work perspective, it was like business as usual. Obviously, the aspect of not being able to see certain people, or being able to go to the shop exactly when you wanted in the early days, and queues and all that sort of stuff. Obviously, that hit me, just like it did other people. But I remember having friends pre-COVID that would say to me, "Oh, it's easy for you. You just work at home." And I remember saying to them, "It's not, all that is cracked up to me sometimes, because obviously, you got to work, but you got to stay motivated." And I remember, not for this reason, but just reaching out to them in general during COVID and over the last year or two, and asking how they were, how things are, and they're like, "Oh, it's horrible, working remote." I remember them saying, "Don't know how you've been doing it all these years." So yeah, it definitely does depend on the individual. It sounds like you was the type of person that had the webcam on during the meetings, whilst everyone else had it off. Was you that person?
Yeah, I'm always putting my webcam on.
Yeah, I mean, like for me, it depends. If it's with people I know, let's say if I'm having a meeting with some friends or like a catch up with some friends, I'm the person that's trying to get everyone else to put the mic on, the webcam on. But if it's a bit more businessy, especially if I don't know them, I'm like, I'd rather not have it on. But everyone's different. Some people want it on, some people don't want it on. And you sound like that's how you worked. Obviously, on site as well. You was very, more social.
Yeah, exactly. And like even though I put my camera on in meetings, like I let people know, don't feel like you have to. Like
Yeah.
it's not it's just more so like if you want to read my facial expressions, sometimes I raise my hand rather than doing the raise hand function in our chats. Like it's easier for them to see. I think the only times I'll shut off my camera is when I feel pressure. If it's like 5 people in a room and nobody's put on their camera, and then I'm like, oh, I'll do it for a little bit, and then I gotta stick with it because then I don't want to feel like I was pressured into not. So usually I wait to turn on my camera to see if someone else is doing it.
Yeah, I was just about to say, have you ever been in a situation where you put the camera on a little too early? It's a relatively big meeting, more than like two people. Nobody turns it on, and you're just there, like, should I leave it on, or should I now turn it off after realizing no one's gonna turn it on? But I don't want it on if nobody's having it on. That's an awkward one.
Yeah, the mini social anxieties. I feel that I've been really lucky that if I turn the camera on, like I mean, not including like meetings with just another person or another like two people. Like sometimes I'll turn the camera on and I literally don't care if I'm the only one on there. If it's like a meeting of like 30 people in there, and I'm the first one to turn it on. Usually somebody joins me. But I'm way too stubborn, and I don't know, I'm not proving it to anybody that I'm like, all right, I turn my camera on. I'm not turning it off. I'm sitting here looking like I know what I'm doing. So
Okay, so whilst you were at Riot, what sort of technologies and software did you use at your job?
Well, I would say we used, in terms of pulling, I did SQL, but a lot of our data was in Databricks. And so my role did require me to look a lot of the live data coming in, whether that's straight from the game or whether that's from surveys and things like that. A skill that I had learned at my time at Riot was actually a basic research skill. So I worked really, really closely with our research folks because, I think in order to design great games, or when you think about, again, my specialty there and what I was really focusing on was the monetization aspects of games, you need to know about your player spend behavior. You need to put like other types of in-game behaviors that influence that, right? Like why do people want cosmetics, for example? Like what do they care about in cosmetics, right? And so I got pretty decent. I would never compare myself to folks who have true craft expertise on it, of using things like saw tools, Qualtrics, things like that. So again, less hard coding, but definitely tools that we've used to um, survey players, to pull data from players. Honestly, a lot of times when I do, even today, like if I'm doing like basic design work, honestly, sometimes I'm just doing that in PowerPoints, which is like if I need something to do really basic, I'll do it in PowerPoint or like Google Sheets or like things like that. But yeah, pretty simple in terms of like the tools. A lot of the things are pretty easy to just pick up. A design tool I also use is Machinations. That one is a little bit more complex and did require time to kind of actually understand. And that is a very much so like a specific design tool that I use more so at Amazon than I did at Riot. Tools like Figma to do wireframes, right? If I'm building what a storefront will look like or what a trading post will look like, right? Sometimes I'll do a wireframe in it in Figma and then partner with our UX and UI folks to actually make it look beautiful.
Okay, so post Riot, you went on to Amazon Games, and you've been there for 6 months. Why did you leave Riot? Because it seemed like you got fond memories of Riot. It sounds like a cool place to work, and a lot of perks, and you like their titles. And like, what made you join Amazon? And what was the interview process like for Amazon? And how did that compare to Riot? I know there's a bunch of questions there, so feel free to just break them down.
Yeah, so I guess I'll tackle with kind of like why I left Riot and why I was searching outside of Riot. So I was kind of at a place in my career where I was seeking, I think, new experiences, and seeking experiences. I had, I think, about 2.5 years under my belt, and I started to figure out what I already liked and what I didn't really like. I liked being really part of the development process. I also really liked and wanted to be on a live ops game, right? And so, as much as single player games, I really enjoy playing them. In my own life in game, I'm usually a like co-op player, multiplayer, and so I wanted to kind of go back into the live ops space and get more and broader experience there. So I was trying to find something that mixed both. Like, is there a game where I'm early on in development process, I can see to it being launched, and then I can manage live ops after, right? There were some roles like that at Riot, but not quite, I think, the ones I was looking for, because partially I also wanted to be really passionate about the game itself. So looked around Riot for those things and decided, why not look outside? I also think it's really important every few years to um, reevaluate your market rate as well. I think it's like a healthy thing to do. So part of the reason I also did that was, okay, let me check out and see what other companies are there. So I interviewed at Epic, EA, Bungie, Amazon, and ultimately I decided to pick Amazon. I can't really speak to the game itself because the game is currently unannounced. But the head of the studio, his name is John Smedley, often goes by Smed. But if you were to look him up, he is awesome, badass. I knew I would be able to work with him. You can kind of make a guess of what type of game we're making based off of Smed's background. So feel free to wiki him if you want, and you can kind of get a sense of that. But I really, really liked him and really liked the team. The Amazon process was much quicker compared to Riot. I think partially because I was interviewing at several places at the same time and had a couple of offers. So Amazon was actually really accommodating to speeding up my process. And so theirs mostly was like a couple of phone interviews, and then they kind of push you to the what they call the virtual onsite, which I think was like, it's meant to be done in one day, but I think it's like 6 interviews in a day that I was able to split over 2 days because I was interviewing, I think at that time at EA at the exact same time. So in the morning, I think I had like 3 Amazon interviews. In the afternoon, I had 3 EA interviews, and I did that again the next day just because of like that was the only way for me to get things in from a scheduling perspective and meet deadlines for other type of offers. So Amazon was actually really accommodating there. I really liked the team, and I got a sense that Amazon Games, the culture, was different from Amazon corporate, where I heard things sometimes not so great about the general Amazon culture, but one of my mentors, her husband, it works in Amazon Games. I got connected with other folks who used to work at Riot that then worked at Amazon Games, and they gave me the honest like lowdown of what the culture is like there. Not the same as Riot, obviously, but still something that I thought I would really enjoy. And 6 months in, I really, really do like it.
Okay, you said you had, was it 3 Amazon interviews in the morning, 3 like EA interviews in the evening? Was that like for the same role, or was that for separate roles? Like because I've never really heard of for the same role having multiple interviews back to back on the same day. It's usually you do one, you get some feedback. If you move to the next stage, you do another. So can you just explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so most interview process, and I know I'm generalizing here, has like you were saying, like stages. Like usually your interview, they decide if you're going to move forward for that or not. At Amazon, we still do that. In the beginning, it's like several phone calls, and whether you pass those, then you get moved to the next one. Then they have at the end something called like an on-site. My guess is back pre-COVID, you would actually have been like flown out to the studio or kind of flown up maybe even to Seattle to actually interview folks. But the on-site is pretty much multiple interviews in a day because they're testing for lots of different things. They're usually testing for things, at least at Amazon, they're testing for things that relate back to their leadership principles. And they're also testing like your actual craft or your actual job discipline skills through a course of several interviews. So EA had that structured similarly, where EA Games also had, a few beginning stages. If you pass that, you move that to the next one. And then they had, again, their virtual on-site. Because I was interviewing at multiple companies at the same time, and both roles were for senior product manager type roles. But the EA one was for a shooter game, and then Amazon was for a different one. So very different types of games in different genres. I think Riot actually is pretty similar. They have more of those initial stages where you have to pass before you get moved forward. But if you pass those initial stages at Riot, you then also get put onto a onsite, which again was originally in person. I think when I had done for Riot, my onsite was again like 6-7 interviews from like 9 a.m. all the way to the end of the day, with a lunch break and breaks in between. So I think that's pretty standard from what I've seen from most of the gaming companies that I've interviewed at.
And I'm guessing companies like Amazon and Riot, they probably provide lunch whilst you're at, the interview. I'm guessing, especially if you're there for a whole day.
Yeah, if you're in person, they almost always provide lunch, snacks, breaks for you. They usually provide like a lunch buddy, and so it was just to get a sense, ask them about the culture, ask them about their work and stuff like that. So it was a good experience. I think I remember. Like after a day of interviewing, it's so exhaustive. I like have had a major headache, I think, after the Riot one, because I was like going through so many case studies all day. Like I think they had one where I was like just digging through so much information and presenting like what my recommendation was, things like that. So it was actually kind of difficult. I think Riot was probably my most difficult interview loop to this day of all the companies that I've interviewed at.
Okay, so those other companies that you mentioned, like EA, Bungie, etc., did you get any offers before you accepted the Amazon one from any of them? And because with those other ones, you're not under contract or anything, what specific, project was you going for each one of those companies? Because obviously, I'm sure, like especially EA, they've got loads of projects going on and loads of different divisions. So, like, what was you specifically going for?
Yeah, so for oh god, no, I think Destiny was to work on their. Oh, sorry, I'm saying Bungie was to work with their Destiny IP. EA was actually with one of their smaller sub studios within it. I think that one was working on Battlefield Mobile. Amazon was one where, again, it was an unannounced title, so I actually didn't. I found out about what the game was throughout my interview loop and signed an NDA with them as well. Um, Epic would have been for which uh, Fortnite. Um, and I'm trying to think. And then I also interviewed at a startup that was looking at like social games and kind of connecting that with the blockchain, which I had the least interest in, but the space is so ambiguous and like that part of it was really cool. I did have several offers before Amazon. And so I did leverage that to be like, hey, Amazon, I have a couple offers on the table. But I'm really interested in this role. Like, is there any way that we can expedite the process? And that's actually what they did for me, which was really cool.
Okay, so who were those other offers with? Which companies?
Yeah, so I got the offer from the startup. Unfortunately, I did not get Epic, which I'm really bad about. But it was not my best interview. I'm not gonna interviews. I'm not gonna lie. I actually got one from TikTok, which was nothing to do with gaming, but I just happened to have that at the time. EA came back to give me a verbal offer right before Amazon because their interviews finished right before Amazon. I think that was it. And I was still interviewing with Bungie and ended up not finishing the process because I decided to take Amazon before I finished it with Bungie.
Okay, so what about Amazon really sold it for you? Was it that you know, unannounced project that you learned a little bit more about, or was it even before you learned about what you was gonna be working on? Like, what about Amazon compared to Bungie? Obviously, you say you didn't get the Epic one. If you had got the Epic one, another question: would you have gone for that one? And I'm guessing you're a fan of Fortnite then.
Yeah, I used to play a decent amount of Fortnite. But I honestly haven't touched that game in at least a year. But I think that game is such an incredible case study of what success looks like. A lot of games have modeled, for example, like back in like 2018, Fortnite popularized the Battle Pass, which is a common monetization system that you see used in all types of games of various genres. So I definitely would have been super excited to support Fortnite. But I think what it was about Amazon was, yes, it was the game itself. I think that the type of game that I'm super interested in and it would be excited to play as a player. But it was honestly mainly the people that I interviewed with. My manager, or who was the hiring manager at the time, like honestly crafted the role for me. It was really interesting when I had first chatted with my manager on that first phone call, or I think it was the second phone call. Sorry, he he was very honest with me about giving feedback right away, which I've honestly never seen before. And he was like, "You have some amazing experiences, and I think you'd be fantastic in these aspects." He's like, "I think you're going to be a little bit weak here." He's like, "And I could be wrong. Like, tell me I'm wrong, and I'll just throw you through the rest. I'll push you through the rest of the interview process." And I was like, "No, I think you're right. Like, I don't have experience doing that thing, right? Like, managing and building a complex economy, which." Now I do have some of those experiences. I'm building that out now. But that was like a key part of the role, at least in the description, the original description. But where he kind of saw my strengths, he's like, there are a few options. We kind of push you down for this role. He's like, maybe I craft you a role for the same team where it leverages your strengths, but then I make sure that you get the supplemental support so that you can build the right expertise, and then you can actually like build a complex economy and like manage what that looks like, right? Not just because that is a small component of monetization, or an adjacent component of it, sorry. And so kind of that initial conversation with him was like, wow, like he sees a lot of value in me. I'm excited about the game. I like him as a manager, and he wants to craft a role for me so that I can get on the team, so that I can be a part of it. So they ended up doing that, pushed me down the interview loop. I loved the people that I interviewed with. One of them is Smed, who is the head of the studio. The conversations I had with them were honestly really great. Honest, I thought they had great questions, and I was excited about the vision of the game and the impact that I could have on the game, right? That's a key piece of it as well. And so it was a little bit of like a no-brainer. After I had got that offer, I think I accepted almost, I gave him like a day or two turnaround, but I accepted. In my mind, I accepted like right away.
Okay, so how did the salaries compare amongst, all the different, companies? Who was paying more and who was paying the least?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not gonna call out any specific person. I feel like maybe I can get in trouble for that. But I will say that in terms of like compensation, when you compare gaming companies to tech companies, gaming companies are usually come in a little bit lower. For similar roles, if you're looking across engineering, if you're looking across product management, like game industry tends to pay a little bit less. That doesn't say that it doesn't pay well, by the way. And so Amazon considers themselves more so a tech company. So I would say that compensation was totally a part of it, right? Like a part of the reason I also interviewed with other companies was to see what my market rate was. And so in terms of compensation overall, all the offers that I got and I had started negotiating it with were definitely above what I was getting paid at Riot. And Amazon ended up being the most, but I also negotiated with Amazon too to kind of push up what that limit could be in terms of my full salary or my full compensation. So yeah, I didn't fully answer the question. I hope that helps. Like I totally do believe in being as transparent as possible, but I also don't want to get in trouble with saying
No,
exactly
that's fine.
the
Because
pay.
obviously
Yeah,
you never know. You might be at Amazon for a few years. You might go and interview at Epic, and they're like, "Oh, you said this online about us. We don't want you." That's
yeah.
fair enough. But why do you think? Because I've heard that as well, and everything I've read. Why do you think that is with gaming compared to tech? Because gaming is it's a sub branch of tech. Effectively, especially the way gaming companies are now. With all the data and all the technologies involved, and especially when stuff like Epic, they got Fortnite, they got the Epic Games launcher, they got all their stuff. You've got League of Legends. Obviously, he wasn't going for something like Call of Duty, but you've got and you got GTA. You got all these video game companies that are making a lot of money. So it's not even like they're not making money. It's like, why do you think they're paying less than conventional tech?
Mm.
Just,
I
just
mean,
your
that is the
personal
question.
opinion.
Yeah, that is the question. The real answer is I don't know, but my best guess, or what I've kind of heard, and that makes sense, is that the gaming industry is very much so a passion industry. And so a lot of folks are super willing to join the industry at a lower salary or a lower total comp, like just so that they can work on the games they want to work on, and or work on the IPs that they want to work on. I think you find that actually quite similar to friends I know that work at Disney, which is like top tier in terms of the IPs that they have, in terms of the content that they make. But from a salary perspective, I heard that Disney just doesn't match, other media companies, or even within that industry. And so I think that probably plays a huge role of why gaming salaries in general tend to be a little bit lower than tech salaries. People are willing to get those roles just because they want to be in it, and because of that, like where your salary is today will impact your salary tomorrow in a future jobs, because you're going to often use that as a starting point. You normally don't want to get paid less than that in your next job, right? So if somebody is starting and entering in the industry, and I'm making these numbers up, these are not the actual numbers, that like 50K for gaming and 80K for tech, right? Their starting points are different. And so when they move up the ladder, right, their salary increases are going to look different as well. And so that probably like extrapolates out to why people in general in gaming have less salaries than tech. But again, that's just my best guess. I don't actually know.
Okay. No, I mean, I think I kind of agree. Like, it is considered, oh, like, if you aren't really that passionate about it, go to a tech company. Like, people probably go work for, let's say, TikTok or Facebook, or even Google. Like, you hear, oh, Google, I want to work at Google, but outside of that, they're probably not that passionate about the search engine, or Gmail, or it's more just the fact that you're working at Google. But whereas with, let's say, Disney, you're working, where Frozen was made, or now Star Wars, and no matter how good or bad they are now, or if you're working for a company that's making Fortnite, if you really like Fortnite. But do you feel that's fair, and do you feel like that's, even though that's fair enough, you should only work, or their thinking is they only have people that are passionate about it? But do you think they're kind of taking advantage then, effectively? Because I understand if it's a company that's on the on the lower end, they don't have that much cash flow, and they're like, oh, this is a gaming company, come here if you're passionate, otherwise, go to a tech startup. That I understand. But when you're saying big titans that rival like the music and the movie companies, and sometimes surpass them, so do you feel like they're taking advantage of people as a result?
Honestly, kinda. I mean, first, like, yeah. Again, we're not comparing, like, I get it. Game companies, they don't have the money. They can't pay, right, their employees as much as the big titans, like you're saying. But yeah, I totally do. I think the work that our gaming folks do is just as good as our tech counterparts. And so they should be paid market rate as the tech companies. Unfortunately, that's not the full case of it. And again, that was partially the reason I looked at Amazon too. Like, I'm not going to lie, compensation does matter. It's not the only thing that matters, but it really helps to know that you're getting compensated fairly. And if you don't feel like that in your original offer with other teams, that could also kind of lead to, like maybe bad experiences with the company, or you're starting off on the wrong foot. So no, I definitely think that a lot of companies in general take advantage of the fact that people just want to be part of the company, or be part of the IP, or be part of the game. And that's like not chill.
Yeah, I think it is crazy the way they use that as basically an excuse for paying you less, instead of saying, you know what, we can afford to pay you, we'll pay you well. And I think what would be even fairer is to say, we'll pay you market rate, or maybe more, but the interview process is going to be a lot more grueling. Instead of taking a month, it's going to take 6 months. Or instead of doing 3 interviews, you're going to do 10. Because at that point, you're probably going to, statistically speaking, only get the people that are serious about it. So I feel like there are ways to get more serious, and as a result, better coders, better designers, better sound engineers, whatever it is, better people without sacrificing on paying them more. And on top of that, you hear a lot of about crunch and employees their time being taken advantage of in the gaming industry. You generally don't hear about it that much in the tech industry, in my opinion. I'm sure it exists in tech companies. I'm not talking about startups. The startups is different because obviously you're scrapping along, you're trying to make things work. I'm talking about established companies here. Like you hear about it a lot in games companies. So yeah, I think it's one of those things where because it's become no, it happens so much. It's just become normal. It's just become normal that you're working so many hours in a day, that you're going to be working 6 or 7 days a week, or you're going to be earning a little less. And uh, I feel like other companies, they either don't want to break the mold because they're scared of the backlash potentially from their peers, or because they don't need to. It's not like, oh, we need to increase our salaries because every gaming company has. It's just we're still going to get the employees. So yeah, I think it's one of those things. It's just a vicious cycle that just feeds into each other, and I think it's going to take a few companies, like Amazon, that have the might to employ people, have a more tech background, and hopefully they stick with that philosophy of we're a tech company, will abide by tech company rules, which is generally paying good amount. If you do get a lot of conventional companies come in and do that, I think that might force the typical gaming companies to rethink their sort of position and hopefully start paying more, compensating more, and treating their employees better.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, it's interesting because gaming, and especially for folks like you and me, is such a big part of our lives. It's part of like it's a lifestyle or part of the lifestyle, right? But the gaming industry itself is still arguably small and still arguably niche, right? Again, compared to its like tech counterpart, right? And I imagine that that'll slowly start to change over time as gaming companies are not just like game in general is not just like a side passion or things for nerds, like especially with Arcane out there, movies being off of video games, right? Like you're starting to consume general media based off of video game IPs, or you're seeing more of like traditional media trying to make games right with their IP. As you're seeing more and more of that crossover, which is absolutely the trend that's going on, I imagine more folks are going to be open to the eye of like, wow, I want to work in this field. I want to be in gaming. And I've seen a lot of my friends from tech have really strong and genuine interest in coming over to the gaming side. And so I wonder as more people from other industries, especially tech, that come through, if they'll demand for the same amount of salary and compensation. I have a friend who actually came over from tech and he took a salary cut. He took a he down leveled and took a salary cut because he really, really wanted to work on Valorant. And so for him, it was worth it to work on Valorant. But I wonder if like people are going to still be making those trade offs or willing, or if like companies that have a gaming sector to it, like Amazon Games is part of the conglomerate, obviously, Amazon as a whole, will hopefully raise the bar in terms of like compensation, overall compensation, things like that. So I'm hoping it trends to be better. I do think the industry is improving. A lot of these gaming companies shouldn't just look at other games as comps, like other gaming companies as comps from an HR and from a salary perspective, but they should also be looking at tech companies, or like where are their people going. A lot of people from Riot went to Meta, a lot of people from Riot went to tech companies, so clearly they're drawing from similar pools of talent, and as a result, I think like in terms of who you're comping to from other companies should reflect that.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think other companies, other non, gaming companies that didn't start for gaming companies, hopefully they do break the mold, and yeah, I think it might shift things within the gaming industry. But I think it's one of those things we'll tell in about 5 to 10 years if it actually has done any, major, damage to the way gaming companies operate.
Yeah.
So how does working at Amazon compare to working at Riot Games? Like, what are the similarities, but what are the differences that you've noticed and experienced?
Mm. I was surprised to say that I saw more similarities than I expected. Um, Now, keep in mind that my role at Amazon, I happen to be fully remote today, partially because I don't live near the studio, and that was built into my contract when I signed, but also partly because the studio that I'm working on isn't open yet. I think it should be open really early next year, so I can't even go in to see the folks, even if I wanted to. Um, and so, like in terms of similarities, though, I think part of it is like the people and their passion for the product. A lot of the people that I'm working with just have been in the industry for many years, love making games. I think what Amazon Games, or my studio in particular, does really well is they're trying to limit the amount of crunch time that there is, right? That's so notorious, like you talked about before in the industry. Riot definitely suffers from crunch. Amazon Games as a whole probably still does, but the studio that I'm working with, they set a pretty good example of like, listen, we're going to do our best not to. Leadership is like, if it's 3 o'clock on a Friday, get off, right? Like they lead by example. They're really good at reducing or limiting scope. If something is being too much for folks, they constantly keep tabs on and surveys on like how much people are working, if they're enjoying their work. And so they're actively trying to make sure that it's a welcoming and like healthy environment from a work-life balance. I think what I've seen my time at Amazon Games is work life balance has also been a lot easier. And that's not to throw any shade at Riot. I think part of it, the Riot culture, is that like people are in the Riot culture. And I loved that about it. Like you are proud to be a Rioter. People will call themselves a Rioter outside because like the culture, the people are awesome. Like some of their best friends are in the company, right? Like it's common to see like core circles of friends, like being your coworkers, which was such an interesting dynamic that I didn't have, before joining Riot. And I think that's unique to Riot. Amazon Games, we still, I think, have really good relationships, but there's more of that work-life balance of like people separating work and life, going home to take care of their kids, like letting them have long lunch breaks so they can go see their kids' baseball games. Like that's actually like built in. I think we have like lunch times completely blocked off for an hour and a half to encourage like people not to book meetings during that time. And so far, like I've really enjoyed my time at Amazon Games. I think what's a little bit different is how the folks at Amazon Games make decisions. The ways of working are going to be a little bit different too, which is partly influenced because of the fully remote environment that we're currently in. Um, but yeah, does that kind of answer your question? I started to ramble a little bit.
No, it does. I think that's good to hear that Amazon is definitely trying to break the mold, make it different, and but still work on games. But it sounds like you're enjoying your time at Amazon, which is good. Whilst at Amazon, do you work with their Lumberyard game engine at all? And if so, what do you think of it?
The game that I'm currently on, is not on Lumberyard, but I do think New World is. Don't quote me on that one. I don't want to spread misinformation. I feel like New World is on Lumberyard, but we do not. And so I don't. As a result, I don't really have any thoughts around it. I've actually never
Okay.
used. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, obviously I know you can't say too much, but is there
Mhm.
any particular reason why it's not on Lumberyard, considering that's their own game engine, which is built on top of the Cry engine? You would assume they would push that.
Yeah. The honest truth is I don't have a good answer. I'm definitely not the right person to ask of why we don't use those, even though it is their own engine. I think maybe partially it's probably because like when you think about the games that are being released, they're often working closely with like other platforms to be released on, right? Like what works well for those, what are the specs they need, like all those types of things, and how easy it is going to be, especially if you have a cross-platform game. I don't know if Lumberyard is the best for that. And now that being said, I have really limited knowledge because I haven't used it, so don't quote me on that. But that's kind of my best answer for somebody who honestly doesn't really know.
Okay, and like, what type of games do you like to play yourself?
I'm naturally a really competitive gamer, um, which is kind of sad because I don't have the skills to back it up. But like I love playing multiplayer competitive games. I really enjoy League. I played Valorant. I've been playing a lot of Overwatch 2 right now. So any games, and I'm a very social gamer, right? Like if my friends are playing a game, or like when I was at Riot, I basically all my friends started playing League of Legends and Valorant, and that was like our games for a while. And so those are pretty much it. In terms of like, I don't really play single player games as much anymore. Mostly because I'm missing like that social element that I really crave from games. But I think the last single player game I played was probably Cyberpunk, which was which I thought it was a good game. It had a lot of like bugs and issues, but PC performance really wasn't that bad. And they came out with a TV show, by the way. I don't know if you've seen it on Netflix, and it's really good. Like the art, the story, like honestly, I was so surprised. I think it's a sleeper pick. If you guys haven't checked it out, you should definitely check it out. It was dope.
Yeah, I remember seeing it on Netflix. I haven't checked it out myself. I had a quick go at Cyberpunk 2077. Yeah, I wasn't the biggest fan of the game, but I know a lot of people did enjoy it. Obviously, there was a lot of hype around it. I think it'll probably become like how Witcher was. It launched, there were bugs, they fixed stuff over time. It happened. Those games are big, and CD Projekt Red, their titles, they do good stuff. So it's
Mhm.
I think they'll iron out any sort of issues they have. And like in terms of gaming for me, that I actually have gone the opposite way. I used to play a lot of online games a lot as a kid, and now because I try and get some gaming in on a daily basis, but I don't do say 5 6 hour gaming sessions or all day or all weekend or anything anymore. When I play, if I want to play for an hour, I want to know that hour is going to be used as much as possible, and I'm going to have some fun with it instead of trying to rank up a character and then I don't even
Mm.
rank it up enough to know enjoy it, because that's one of the things I hate about online gaming, especially nowadays. Uh, how it is where you could be a good gamer, you go on. If you just don't play a lot and you don't have the best armor, the best weapons, the best powers, you're just gonna get owned by every single player, every mediocre player there is. That's the reason if I do play, I'll probably play something like Call of Duty, where I think it's the 2v2 round, where you don't have any extra add-ons. You pick up the weapons on the map. The Halo, where you pick up the weapons on the map, and it's literally purely skill. I
Mhm.
don't. It doesn't matter if I've been playing for 10 months or 2 weeks. If I'm good, I'm good. If I'm bad, I'm bad. But yeah, I
Mm.
play a lot of single player generally now. Stuff like Uncharted, and there'll be God of War that's come out today as well.
Yeah. Did you see the Uncharted movie? I think it's on Netflix now.
Yeah, I did see it. I mean, the thing, I'm a big fan of the Uncharted games. Played all of them multiple times on PS3, PS4 now, with PS5 as well, and on PS Vita. Platinumed every single version of them as well. So it's I watched it. I didn't have the highest hopes going into it, and I think the one thing, I wasn't the biggest fan of the Tom Holland casting for Nate.
Mm.
I felt like it was in Mark Wahlberg looked more like Nate than Tom Holland did. Then on top of that, they kind of use characters and storylines from the movies, but they changed them up. Like the
Yeah.
cross, they still was a different cross. That character who's I can't play. I can't remember who's that famous actor, but who's clearly Rafe but not Rafe. And then they have the person who's Nadine but not Nadine, and a lot of stuff like that. That just it, for me, I didn't like. I did. You ever see the actually? What did you think of it before I just move on to the next thing?
Yeah. So I've actually I'm not in deep into the Uncharted IP like you are. I've actually only ever watched my friend play it, and I haven't even played any of the games itself. Uh, I thought, and I'm not surprised to hear your answer. I think the movie itself has pretty mixed to negative
It
reviews.
does, yeah.
Yeah, and even if I knew nothing about the Uncharted IP, I still thought it was mid.
Mm.
I like Tom Holland as an actor. I think he's like he's been great in some of his other stuff.
I
You're
couldn't
right.
stop seeing him as Spider-Man. That was the issue.
Yeah, exactly. Like a goofy. Yes. No. I same. So I thought it was like a mid action movie for somebody who is not even familiar with the IP. So yeah. And who is? Oh my god. Who is the? What is his name? Who's played the older character again?
Mark Wahlberg.
Yeah, Mark Wahlberg. Actually, I haven't seen him in a movie in a while, so it was actually kind of nice to see him in there. But yeah, it was like a mid action movie for me. Would not really recommend for other people to see it, but I was just curious if you saw it since you really like the Uncharted games. Are you usually like a? Do you usually play on the PC or do you play like on console?
I mean, it depends on the game because
Mm,
some game, obviously, I know a lot of games are becoming very cross-platform. Halo, Forza, that was typically Xbox only, is now
yeah.
obviously on PC, and even PlayStation games, maybe not on launch, but a few years later, like Spider-Man, God of War, Horizon, are coming on PC. I mean, I try to like the Halo, the Forza, I'll reserve for. I call them the native console, effectively for them, and then
Mhm.
Uncharted for consoles. I play mainly console gaming now, but I started off mainly on PC. So if I have a choice, generally speaking, I'll go for PC gaming. I do prefer a keyboard and mouse. I was that kid that would play Need for Speed on a keyboard and prefer it over a controller. I would use the arrow keys and the space bar for NOS, and I would prefer it so much more than a controller. So it depends on the game. I'm happy either way because I've seen people where they're PC gamers and you put a controller in front of them and they're like, "Oh, how do I even play?" They just find it confusing, and vice versa. People who've always been console gamers, they get a keyboard and they're like, "What's all these keys for?" So, but the other thing is, I find some games just don't translate that well over to PC if the sort of input mapping hasn't been, implemented well. Because sometimes, on the keyboard it just doesn't feel right, or the keys just don't really map the way they've done on a controller. But that's just purely from a perspective of they haven't put the time and effort into, coding it or designing it more for keyboard and mouse. But I love both. And right now, if I do play Halo Online, because I play with my cousin, he plays it on PC, and I played the single player on Xbox. I just play it on PC. So yeah, it depends. It depends on the game. Depends on how I'm feeling as well.
Yeah, yeah, and you make a really great point. Like when you're porting a game over that was not initially like intended, or maybe it was intended, but it was later down the planning of going to console from PC or vice versa. It's actually like not always a simple and easy thing to do. It's not like you can take that game and then just a PC first game and then just shove it in and make it a really great console game, right? Like if sometimes you need aim assist, the way that you control your camera, right? Like even those things like need nuanced changes, I think, to do really well and to make it feel fluid and on console versus like PC. So I always find it like really interesting. I like to try to test games that were ported over later and to kind of feel it through. So yeah, no, you make a really interesting point.
Yeah, you're right. When they port the games, so some games, when they're made for console, the turning isn't as fast as you would do it with a mouse, just due
Mm-hmm.
to the limitations of the joysticks, but also the sort of game players then they know they're gonna get, so they have things a little slower. But when they put that on PC, it just feels a little too slow. Or if the rest of the game is made with that sort of pacing in mind, even if you increase the speed of your the camera effectively when you're moving the mouse, you still got enemies that are coming at you up that probably are pretty slow, or your characters generally moving pretty slow. So yeah, there is that thing, and I think some games do it well. Like I played Halo on Xbox. I felt like it worked really well there. playing it on PC, and even with PC versus Xbox, I feel like they've done a good job where it feels pretty balanced. Same with Call of Duty. One thing I was very surprised with was when Halo did Halo Wars and Halo Wars 2, which was their, I don't know if you played it, their real time strategy games, and they've had them on Xbox. And I remember thinking, RTS is generally, typically, with like Age of Empires and that, it's generally PC
PC.
only.
Yeah.
And I thought, that ain't going to work. And when it came out, I was like, this actually works really well. They've actually done a really good job with the limitations of the controller to make it work. So sometimes I do get surprises where I'm like, I was not expecting this to work well, but then it does. But sometimes I'll try like Crash Bandicoot. Big fan of Crash Bandicoot. Play it on PlayStation all the time, and then I've got it on Steam. If I'm gonna play it on PC, I'll use a controller. Tried Kino like a keyboard, and it just feels too hacky. It feels
Mm.
like I'm playing with an emulator, even though I'm not.
Yeah. 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 And that's the same. That's like when you port it well and you take the investment to do so, like you can oftentimes as a player really feel the difference, right? And I would say like not every game needs to be ported across multi-platform, though in most cases it makes sense. The one that really always interests me is like mobile, and especially if you have a AAA game, high fidelity game on PC or even console, and trying to take that to mobile is such an interesting challenge because mobile really opens up who your audience could be, because there's a lot of mobile only gamers out there, but it's definitely not easy to translate that to that platform too. It can even be, I imagine, like sometimes even more challenging. At least that's what I've seen from some of the games that I've worked on.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I found that when they ported it to mobile platforms, even if it's not the exact game, but it's something similar. So I remember when the Call of Duty game came out for mobile a few years ago. I felt like they took ages to get a card out for mobile, but when they did and they were serious about it, I remember going in there and thinking, playing online, I'm thinking this is way too easy. Like I'm playing online
Mm.
against real people, and I'm winning a lot easier than I would be if I played this on PC or console without any practice for a few days to get
Yeah.
back into the swing of things. I was like number one on the leaderboard, and I don't think I was that good. I think it's just because the sort of people that were playing it were so sort of bad, and they weren't really gamers in the conventional sense. That you
Hmm.
just got a lot of people that just, and obviously with the touchscreen, it's not the best either. Or when you see they're heavily promoting you add some sort of controller attachments to your phone, and then at that point it's like you're trying to make it a Switch, but it's probably not as good as a Switch,
Yeah.
or with the Steam Deck now. So I mean, have you had a chance to have a go at the Steam Deck?
No, I actually haven't.
I mean, the Steam Deck surprised me. It works. I mean, there's bugs, but it works really well in terms of performance. And
Huh.
because the resolutions, I mean, the screen's smaller, they can go lower resolution, and the actual settings lower and still look really good. And especially games from 10 to 15 years ago, they still look really good now. I'm playing Max Payne 3 on it. I was playing GTA 4 on it, and Max Payne 3, I think I was maxing out GTA 4. I was mostly maxed out settings, running pretty much at 60 frames per second. And I remember just thinking, it, it's games that I really loved, and I've said for years I want to play again, but I've just been busy with other titles. It's like a new game, but not a new game. So it's
Mm.
been a great way to experience old games again. And if you've already got a Steam library, if you're a PC gamer, you probably have. You've got so many games that just work for the most part out of the box. So I think it's a compelling system, and I hope that it puts Microsoft and more specifically Sony back into gear of doing a portable console, because I do miss the PSP and even the PS Vita. It's a shame they never did another one.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. I've heard of the Steam Deck. I've never, like I said, never used or bought it myself. I do have the Switch, and so sometimes when I'll travel, I'll bring that along. But yeah, in terms of like portable, that's such like an OG thing. Like when I used to play GameCube, not GameCube, but I used to play Game Boy, bringing that along, like that was a core part of like shaping the gamer that I am today. So if you like this, I'm definitely gonna maybe check it out and maybe buy it
Oh,
for myself and say it's
oh,
for
yes,
research purposes.
yes. I mean, Steam Deck definitely worth getting, and
Oh,
the
cool.
the price point to entry because the lowest model is like 300 and something. Now, it's not a spec difference. It's
Yeah.
they do have like a difference in screen. It's just something like anti glare for the higher end ones, and then non anti glare for the lower end. But the spec is the same. They have
Mhm.
more internal storage, but you can whack a micro SD card in there to like 2 or 4 terabytes, and they're not expensive nowadays. Off Amazon, I'm sure you can get Amazon discount as well, so
Yeah.
so you can actually get it even cheaper. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely worth checking out. And now you can actually get hold of them. Before there was like PlayStation 5, where for a good few months you couldn't get hold of them. So you can actually get one now if you wanted it.
Oh, that is cool. Yeah, I would check it out. And it's nice because on their website you can see the full tech specs for each of the different ones too, which is
Yeah,
dope. Yeah, oh my god, I remember for the PS5. Oh my, I was so lucky because Riot was. I was at Riot at the time, and they were giving out, I think, five or so, maybe a little bit more PlayStations, like a random draw to rioters, and I won. It was probably more than five. I'm making that number up, but I was one of the rioters that won it. So I got a PS5 when a lot of folks couldn't get it. It was the best day of my life. I'm kidding, but it was really awesome.
oh, I mean, that must have been nice to one, get it for free, two, get it when nobody else was able to get it. So I'm guessing it was bad in America as well, because in the UK they were sold out for ages. It came out in November 2020, and we're November 2022 now. It's only up to a few months ago that if you went into a store and you asked them, they kind of laughed you out. It was like, no, we ain't got one. They had plenty of Xboxes pretty quickly. Nobody wanted the Xboxes, but PlayStations, they didn't have for ages. They've got them in stock now, not many, but
Mhm.
they're around that you'd have to pay more than, you know, RRP. I'm guessing it was pretty crazy in America, people selling them for loads of money.
Yeah, resale value was pretty high. I think they made us sign something where we were saying we were not going to resell it. um, but yeah, I mean, I totally looked and I wanted to see what people were reselling it on for like eBay, all the other things. And God, how much was the PS? Let me see, PS5 price. Like what was it
UK
going?
was £450 buying price. I think US it must have been $450 to $500. I'm guessing.
Yeah, like on shelf. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I remember seeing like people selling it for over $700, $800, even higher for it.
Mm.
Hmm.
It was crazy, like the prices that people were selling it for. So,
Seriously.
do you work on your own projects outside of work?
I do work on my own projects. They're actually I don't work. I'm not making my own game though outside, or at least not yet. Most of the things that I work on outside of my regular like day job is around content creation, and then I'm working with some close friends on a like shopping type of app. So it's again not gaming related, but yeah, a lot of my things outside is really around mostly content creation now. TikTok. I used to try to get into YouTube a little bit, but honestly, it's a huge time commitment. And then eventually, I'll be doing my own podcast with a good friend of mine. Her name is Miranda O'Hare. She plays the voice of Sky in Valorant, and we'll be doing a podcast probably early next year, early to mid of next year. So those are like just side projects that I've been working on. Um, but yeah, I mean they've been fun, but it's been hard to balance content creation, like small projects, and a full time job sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I know how it is. Doing multiple stuff, it can be difficult. So, like, what made you start the content creation stuff? I know a lot of people do it, especially
Yeah.
when you're young and you're in the tech or gaming industry. Kind of, almost goes with it nowadays. But it's not everyone does it. What made you want to do that? And what made you do the content, sort of content that you was doing? Because I've seen the stuff that you do on Instagram. It's very different to the stuff that you do on TikTok. Like, what made you do that stuff, or your desire?
I started out because I thought I wanted to stream. Um, and I did quickly learn that I actually don't like streaming that much. But I had thought, I was like, okay, I'm in the gaming industry. I love playing games. Like, why not just start streaming too? And when I had done a little bit of research on it, kind of made, my own channel and things like that. I mean, truth is like, there are people who want to stream to nobody, but I was like, oh, maybe people would want to to see me stream, or maybe they'll have questions about the industry and I can answer them if I have expertise around it and help people that way. So I thought, okay, that would be a cool thing for me to get into. What I learned really quickly, because I was using the Twitch to stream off of, was it's really hard to get in front of people, right? Like for people to watch you when they don't know who you are. So it's just really my friends watching, which I enjoy. They would comment, all that stuff. And so I thought, what if I started creating content on other platforms where it's easier to gain an audience? And that's kind of where I took to TikTok. And so I started creating mostly for fun. But part of it was also be like, okay, if you see me on TikTok, maybe you'd be interested in learning more and I can answer your questions about game dev, about Riot on my actual stream. And so I started creating content first about like, what it is being a Riot game dev, what it is just being like in the industry. I made content around like gaming memes, what it's like being a woman in the games and stuff like that. And surprisingly, like it did pretty well. And so I started gaining an audience on TikTok, and I found that form to be a lot of fun. I really like doing short form video because I like telling like bit-sized small stories on it, and that people were coming then to watch me play. I would think I was mostly streaming TFT at the time. I was like in plat or diamond and trying to get into masters, which I never did, unfortunately, and haven't and stopped playing. But when I was streaming, kind of back to the point, I realized pretty quickly after streaming for a few months that I actually did not like it that much. I really enjoyed talking to people on it, but I didn't like playing games and making it feel like it was a job. So I'll be like, okay, I'm streaming 2 to 3 times a week between these hours at least. And then I started like dreading it because I was like, oh my God, now I have to play because I have to play, not because I want to play. And I don't know if everybody kind of feels that. And so I decided to stop streaming, but I still really love doing other types of content creation, particularly, again, short form video. So I continued making TikToks. I do a little bit less of it now. I dabbled in YouTube for a little bit, which was fun. But mostly, again, still returning and creating content on TikTok because I found that I was able to kind of build a community who, yes, loved games, but I build a community of like other female gamers or, non-binary gamers and like those folks who are interested in what it's like and what I do. And I think that made it really rewarding and why I still make content today.
Yeah, I mean, I actually had a similar experience where I've done a lot of content creation, still doing stuff like YouTube, and then I started live streaming, games and gameplay,
Mm-hmm.
and like you said, I felt like it became a chore, and on top of that, when the content itself isn't doing that well compared to, let's say, just other, pre-recorded videos, but you just want to play the game, so, I need to stream today or stream this week or I need to make sure I do it, or even though you want to play something else, and or you think, have I done enough instead of doing 20 minutes because people probably want an hour or two. It did get to the point where I just wasn't enjoying playing games anymore. It just became a thing where an hour gameplay session might be just 20 minutes of setup or uploading or whatever it is, all that other stuff, and I'm not actually playing that much anymore, and I'm not enjoying it the way that I probably would. So I have stopped it. I would like to go back to it, and I'll do some gameplay videos of VR stuff. But again, they're offline based, so I just play them generally as I would play them with a bit of commentary, and then I
Mm-hmm.
just upload it in my own time. But yeah, I did try the live streaming stuff, and I remember reading somewhere when I was doing some research about it, and getting views and become successful with it. They'll say, there's 2 types of streamers: the streamers that do it because they love playing games, and then the streamers that do it as a business. And they're like, you got to figure out which one you are, because if it's the latter, they were saying you're probably not going to, no matter how people online look that are big streamers and they get a lot of views and a lot of money, no matter how they look, they're not enjoying the game as much as they would be if they're just casually playing it with friends or they're on their own. Or if you want to be the former, then you've got to know that you may get only 10 views a video or a stream. You've got to be happy with that. You're doing it because you want to, and you happen to want to share it as well. So yeah, I think that was the interesting thing that I read about. So if I ever do go back to it, I think I will go back to it from the perspective of I'm streaming it, but I'm first and foremost doing it as something to play.
Yeah. I think you're right. It's like pretty important to distinguish that if you can pretty early on why you're streaming. Obviously, it helps if you love playing games. Like even if you treat it as a business, it helps that you enjoy actually playing what you're playing. But your approach and your goals when you stream, what you're doing outside of it will change, right? Because you have different goals set for it. So I think you make a really good point there. And another thing I used to when I stream, um, I pretty much only ever played ranked games. I don't really enjoy playing unranked games within the games that I play, unless I'm playing with like very close friends, like we're doing a custom or things like that. And I found that I was deranking so fast because I was trying to balance paying attention to answering questions in the stream. People were giving me a lots of tips while I was playing, which like I'm always welcoming it. Like I decide whether I'm going to use it or not, but like thinking through those tips as well and like applying that, I was like, oh my god, like I'm slowly getting worse on it. So then afterwards, I would actually play on my own time to rank back up because I was like, okay, I can just easily focus on what I need to do and what I know I'm good at within this game, which was TFT at the time. So I felt like I was playing double the amount just to keep at the level that I was at. So I mean that's a me problem though. Like I could have totally played unranked, but like what's the fun in that?
Yeah, it definitely is one of those things where you're not fully concentrating on it, or you're not used to playing it online, but then also talking and also knowing that people are going to be watching it. Because usually, if you make a mistake, so it is what it is. But then that sort of puts you down. If you just made a mistake, people are watching you, and you're thinking, oh, I've got to make sure the next time I engage in some little battle or in a little fight online, I've got to do well, because otherwise people are gonna say that I'm not very good at it. So yeah, it is. You got to figure out why you're doing those streams, or if you're doing it for pure enjoyment. And I think it might be better. I've never done it with other people, but it might be better if you did it with other people, let's say some friends, and it was as if you're having like a Friday or Saturday night, but you're also streaming it as well. I think that would be more fun as well. You know, just my personal opinion on that.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Sometimes I played different games or had friends join the stream. The one that they had asked is whenever I was in, because we all share a Discord channel, that whenever I was in it, a room that I would put that I'm streaming, or I made a streaming only room because so my friends came in and they were like, we don't want to say anything on live stream that could be misconstrued. So we want to know you're streaming if we're playing with you. And I was like, yeah, no problem. That is a good thing for me to implement in the Discord so people know before they just join the room and just start talking. So that was like a good little learning as well, because one of my friends said something that was honestly quite mean and not something something I'm going to repeat or share on it. But then I was like, dude, you can't say that. And then I had to delete the whole clip.
Okay, did that person know it was live, or did they just not really care or not appreciate it?
No, he didn't know we were live, and that's kind of
Ah,
why they came up with the suggestion. Because sometimes they're saying stupid things, and I'm pretty good about saying like, "Hey, dude, like not cool." I usually find that it's more of my guy friends that will say stupid things than my girlfriends that play with me.
I
That
was
that
about to
seems to be a
say
trend. Yeah,
probably the guys.
yeah. But after he was like, "Fuck, I'm sorry. Like I wasn't thinking. I didn't know you were streaming." I was like, "Yeah." And if people say stupid stuff when they're streaming, I'll just make sure you guys know anytime that I'm actually on like live.
Yeah, fair enough. So you're launching a podcast. What is that podcast about, and when is it coming out?
Yes. So I am launching a podcast. I think in terms of day, like when, we haven't fully locked it in. We're shooting for probably like springtime next year. I would say is the best over, and it's called Blood, Sweat, and Games. Again, with my co-host will be Miranda O'Hare. And really, the concept of it is that we're sharing stories about how gaming has impacted or changed lives. And so we've been asking folks like from our communities or friends and just or friends of friends to submit stories about like their difficulties or something funny or something crazy that's happened to them within their gaming communities. And part of it is just like we just talk about it. Like we talk about the situation. We talk about like our own thoughts about it. Miranda is a new gamer. She actually would never really play that many video games until voicing Sky. So for her, this community and this gaming industry is from a brand new perspective. And so she offers that to the podcast, and she's super, super interested specifically about gaming, like lifestyle topics. And so we'll often kind of talk about those things. Part of the segment as well is like career advice. And that's pretty much like the very loose structure of it, is sharing stories and then eventually leaving a little bit spot at the end for any news that we think is like super relevant to talk about, or gaming advice based off of people's own questions or own struggles within their career. And yeah, that'll be what the podcast is about. Sometimes we'll have folks that we're interviewing who have interesting stories too. We've interviewed a couple folks within the gaming industry, a couple folks who are actually streamers and who kind of just talk about their experience as well and share their crazy stories, again, which we just like comment on and we ask them more about it. And so that's what the podcast is about. We think hopefully it'll be pretty unique because there's not many female only co-hosts, at least not within the gaming, or not that many of us. And so hopefully we'll add like an interesting perspective to it, especially me being a long time, mostly PC gamer, and her being really brand new to the scene, but she was thrown into it being a pretty iconic character within Valorant.
Yeah, and also from the perspective of you work on games as well, because there's plenty of people,
For
whether
sure.
male or female, that are doing podcasts or interviews or just videos online, but they've never designed or made a game, which is fine. They're coming from their perspective, but to be in the industry and be like, I've worked at Riot, working on Amazon now, and to be able to contrast that, with the game that you're playing, the people you're talking to. So you're saying you've recorded some episodes and you should be launching next summer, you said?
Yeah, spring or summer. What we're trying to figuring out if we're doing like more of a seasonal structure where we're pre-recording, but part of the topics that we want to talk about happen live, like based off of like what news is actually coming out. So it might be a mixed structure of we're recording new ones every week or bi-weekly, and then we sprinkle in some of our pre-recorded ones that were more interview based.
Okay, fair enough. And so I know several people that want to become, developers, get into the industry, that come from a non-technical background. They come from a background that's, totally different.
Mm-hmm.
What advice would you give to them? And what do you say, how long does it realistically take to go from what you was doing before to doing this? Because it ain't going to take a week, but I don't
Yeah.
think it takes multiple years if you're serious as well. So those are my two questions.
Yeah, I would say that there are a couple of different avenues that can work and that have been shown to work well to break into the industry. One would be to, on your own, and gain the relevant skills, right? There are actually boot camps out there. And I can probably put together a list after this podcast of which ones I've known are to be pretty good. Like your boot camps on there, design boot camps, or specifically coding boot camps on how to create games that are really, really helpful. And sometimes they actually segue into getting you interviews with various companies or even like indie dev companies. But the thing is that often takes time, it takes money. And so at that point, you should know what you want to do, right? And so that's why the research portion is quite important in terms of the type of role. A lot of folks, though, will try to get into the industry and not be a game dev, like specifically game dev or game designer or PM right away. Oftentimes, they'll try to find a role that matches their current skill set or is really similar to that. So, like, if they're doing marketing at a certain company, if they're doing finance, HR, anything like that, and they'll try to break in that way. And then that's where it's important to kind of do your best to learn about the company and the company culture, because some companies are honestly really great about allowing you to switch lanes, like to gain like relevant skills. If you're marketing folk but you really want to end up in design, like some companies will help you do that, give you side projects, like give you like put you as part of the teams just to be a fly on the wall so you can learn how they do things. And so I think that's really great. Amazon is one of those places. Riot was pretty good about that as well. And so like it kind of depends. And then in that route, is less time and effort to break into the gaming industry, but sometimes it's longer in the long run to get to the role that you want, right? And so those are kind of the trade-offs there that I would say, but those are the most two common ways I think to kind of break into the industry. I basically took the second way of like finding what skill sets work best based off of what I was already doing. And then I started learning the skills while I was in the industry on the other aspects that I really wanted to know about.
Okay, and what do you think makes a good portfolio for somebody that has no technical or coding or design or dev job before and has no degree within that thing? Because your degree was pretty different. You had one, but it was very different. Like, what do you think makes a good portfolio to stand out? To companies like Riot and Amazon, because they're two big companies. They're not like a small local company.
Yeah, I mean that's highly, highly dependent on the type. Like I would say, like job family type of role that you want, right? Like for a role that I had, honestly, all I needed was a really great resume. I provided some examples of like honestly like what I thought like a like good monetization systems design should have. And then I had a pretty, this is specific to Riot, sorry. And then I had a pretty, I think, well written cover letter. And cover letters aren't read by everybody, but Riot did read mine, and mine was like I think I created it from a way where I was like, it was a story, and I was like telling you about this new champion that arose from the depths of like Runeterra, and these are her dope skills. Like that's like basically how I wrote it, and it was actually received pretty well. Some of the interviewers I remember actually talked about it, and they said it was like kind of fun to read your cover letter. I was like, thank you. And so for that, I think it's making sure that it's just honestly good resume writing skills. Now, again, when I said depending on the role, like if you're going for more of a programming role, software engineer role, right, you obviously need to show, if you don't have like direct work experience, you need to show a portfolio of projects that you've done. Go make simple games, go make mobile games, like anything like that. Put something on Steam. It's not an easy thing to do, but if that's the role you're shooting for right away, you absolutely need to show that you've created a game before, even if it's simple, because I need to understand that you have the skill set and that you have an interest in those types of games and in those types of genres. And so yeah, I mean, that was a pretty generic answer, so I apologize for that. But in terms of like what makes you stand out, I think you always need to give, like, if you're doing art, you always have to have a portfolio. So if you're not standing out within the actual work that you've done yourself, other ways that you can actually stand out is the small things, like again, like incredible resume writing, doing a cover letter. I don't do a cover letter for every company, but for companies I really, really want to be a part of, or I'm super interested in the role, like I take the time to craft something very specific to them, and have gotten like responses that my cover letters, not just at Riot in general, have like been quite good. And I think that's like because a lot of people don't even do that. So those are ways that you can stand out, that it's arguable how much impact, because at the end of the day they need to think that you're a skill set fit and that you're a culture fit. Those are the two like generally most important things. But for them picking up your resume and getting that first phone call, like those have actually been direct feedback that I've gotten as part of it. And some roles don't even require a portfolio. If you really want that role, if you can include something in your portfolio that's beyond the resume and the cover letter, I would always say always do that. Always try to do something, put a little time, a couple weeks into a little project, map it out, map up your logics for it, things like that. And I think that'll help you stand out.
Okay, so in those sort of cover letters, what do you like specifically put? Are you allowed to share what you put for, Riot or Amazon or one of the other ones? Like what do how do you write the cover letter without fanning over the company too much and sounded like you're just fanatical about that company and like what are you effectively putting in there?
I mean, I wouldn't say it's a bad thing to be fanatical about the company if that's truly how you feel. Um, and I would always recommend, like, again, only do the cover letter only if you're super passionate about this specific role and that specific company, because it's really time consuming to do that for if you're applying to 50 100 different roles. And the truth is not every HR and recruiter folks like actually read it too. So that, you know, it's like a hit or miss in whether that is going to help you and help you stand out. If they do read it though, is what I'm saying, you might as well take the extra effort to do it if you want, if you think you're going to love that company. Using it to kind of highlight why you love their products briefly, why you're interested in that company briefly is really helpful. But the cover letter is basically a wider window into what your resume can't touch on, right? Like, what are some of like a lot of times I'll use it to highlight 3 critical experiences and skills that's not like super addressable on my resume. I think for Riot at the time, I was like talking about like what it's like leading a team, like experiences related to that, what it's like, you know, working outside of the role of my scope. Like I picked up several projects and led them on my own, right? Like those are things that it's hard to see in a resume, but I spoke to them and why I thought I would be the perfect fit for that role in that company, because I'm highlighting these 2 to 3 experiences that I had that I think are really unique and you would really want to know about. So yeah, I mean, there are lots of, I think, pretty good formats and templates out there for cover letters. It's up to you to decide how creative you can or want to get depending on the company itself. Like the fact that I wrote it like a story was very specific to Riot because I knew about their IP. I had a general understanding of the lore, and so was able to write about the different factions, like how I was a champion in it. Like that's not something that I would write to every company, or at least like frame it that way. But that was a very specific one for Riot that I thought would work well and would resonate well.
Okay, and just to wrap up now, because you know we've been going for almost 2 hours, gone through most of the questions. Actually, before I ask the last question, so I've got a few minutes. I want to ask a couple of quick, fun, generic questions.
Yeah,
I've
go
got a
for it.
few, but the one I really want that I always love asking is: does money buy you happiness? You kind of talked about compensation and the fact that it's important, but like that direct question, I like to hear people's answers from you and contrast it to where they are and what sort of role they're in. So like, yeah, does money buy you happiness?
I don't think it buys you happiness, but I think feeling like you are not worried financially, and that's going to depend on who you are, is one aspect that can build happiness, right? Like, the truth is, like, if I'm working at a job that I love and I'm barely making ends meet, like, I don't think I'm going to be really happy. And vice versa, if I'm making a lot of money, but I hate what I do, I don't have any passions outside of it, I'm just doing nothing and I'm working, but I'm making a lot of money, that's not going to make me happy either. I think there's a lot of components and there's a lot of good psychology around like what happiness is, but I do think you need to feel financially free, or at least like not be stressed in the financial aspect, and you can determine what that is for yourself. I think happiness also, there's studies around being able to actually live in the moment and and not like worry about the past too much, not have anxiety about thinking about the future too much. That's a hard skill to have, but God, I wish I can look it up for you after this on what study it was. I had read about it, I think, a couple of weeks ago, where these different folks were being asked, their test surveying on like how happy you are, whether thinking positive thoughts consistently like would help elevate your happiness, right? Things like that. And what they saw was that those who constantly outscored on the happiness scales, right, were people who noted that they were just living in the moment and like, again, not burying themselves in the past or building anxiety about the future. So I think that's probably a piece of like happiness as well. Man, actually, I think happiness is a complicated subject. My friends and I go through like existential crisis all the time talking about it. So I think it's funny that you've asked that.
Yeah, I know it's something that I think about deeply, and discuss it with my friends. And like I'll keep it brief because I do know you need to go in a few minutes. But my opinion on it is like what you were saying. If you've got enough money to cover the basics and do a little bit better than the basics, to be able to have a nice place to live, bills are covered, to be able to put food on the table, nice food, go on some holidays, that sort of stuff. I think it's a good avenue for going towards happiness. I think money is like a magnifying glass. If you're generally a happy, I wouldn't say content in the way of you don't want more, but content in being able to live the moment, you're going to be a happy person with money. But then
Mm.
vice versa, if you're that sort of person that you're always complaining, you're always finding the negative in something, you doesn't matter if you've got a few extra 100 grand or a few extra million. It's not gonna make that much of a difference to you. So I think money's a tool, like any tool. If you use it right and use it properly for the job at hand, it can give you a lot of joy. It's like the analogy I use: if you try and make a fried egg with a hammer, you're not going to get very happy. And likewise, if you try and hammer in a nail with a whisk, you're not going to be very happy. You're using the wrong tool. And if you think that by having a lot of money, buying a lot of cars or a lot of clothes or whatever it is, whatever materialistic thing or even experience it is gonna make you truly happy versus knowing that, okay, you've taken care of yourself, taken care of your family, you can work on certain things that as a result won't make you that much money, but because you've got money, I think that's going to make you a lot happier. But knowing that money is like water, it's crucial to life, you need
Yeah.
it, but my water's not everything, but it doesn't mean that it's not important. You need water throughout your life, and that's my opinion on money. So that's my general opinion on it. But it seems pretty
Yeah.
similar to yours, to be fair.
Yeah. I think it like money and happiness specifically at some point definitely has like diminishing returns. I think
Yeah.
that's what it is, right? And that point is gonna be different for everybody. My friends and I often talk about like family that lives in Asia. One of my friends has friends who lives in Thailand, and they don't have a lot of money, right? But they're like honestly really happy that like they're just, and it's very interesting to think about that, like, and at the core of it, they do feel like they can cover their basics, right? And these are folks that like are driving, taxi drivers, or like boating people across the water in Thailand, and they're just like, and then they just go home and they just like are generally pretty happy about life, and it's so interesting to see how that wouldn't be enough maybe for someone like you or someone like me today. Um, but then it's like what'll actually make you happy at that point, because like you said, that there's some point that's going to have diminishing returns if you just look at wealth alone.
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm sure you've read those studies where I think if you go been on like a household goes beyond like $100,000, £100,000, whatever the figures are now with inflation.
Mm.
Happiness doesn't go up too much. I feel like those numbers are a little on the low side, but you're right. Like the difference between having 5 million and probably 10 million, let's say, I don't think it's going to be any difference. It's literally going to be a number on the screen. It's going to make zero difference. The difference between having, let's say, 10,000 and having a million, that's a big difference. Or
Mm.
10,000 and 100,000, or even 10 and 20,000. That's where the differences are, on the lower end, where it actually matters. Because beyond that, having an extra car, having a few extra pairs of trainers, or whatever it is, having a 6 bedroom house instead of a 5 bedroom house, it ain't really gonna matter. It's the same thing effectively.
Yeah.
So yeah. So before we wrap up, just want to ask, what would you do different if you had to start this journey all over again?
Mm. Oh man. Okay. Let's see. I It's a good question. I think that I probably would have tried to get the gaming industry a little bit sooner. That's one piece of it. This is definitely a place where I can see myself long term. And that being said, I don't value the skill set that I got from being in the confectionery business. Like I often joke about it. I went from um, like one guilty pleasure to another guilty pleasure. Um, but I think getting into gaming, like actually maybe even studying for it in college, probably would have given me like an easier way into the industry. That's one piece of it. I, the thing is, like, this is could sound like such a bad answer of like someone who doesn't reflect on oneself, but besides that, like, I think I've made pretty smart choices about what I've been doing in the industry so far. Like I've always taken what I'm doing from a perspective of like I'm always trying to learn new things from it, even if I think I'm doing a role that I have done before. The gaming, there's so many things I just don't know about it, right? And I'm constantly trying to figure out what I'm good at, what I enjoy, what I'm not so good at, like things like that. And I think because I have that perspective, like I wouldn't lose that. I like that I have that perspective going in, and I think it's why I've seen like a decent amount of success in a short period of time. Kind of, for example, being the one of the lead product managers on an expensive game, a game that I'm super excited about, is like not somewhere I thought I would be 3-4 years ago. Like I would have never guessed that. And so I think my approach has been healthy. I think when I kind of need to figure out moving forward still, and I'm thinking through that a lot more, is like still who I want to be. Part of the thing I'm passionate about the gaming industry that I need to push more on in my current role, and I guess this could kind of answer your question that I'm thinking about it, is around my passion for diversity, inclusion, and equity, right? And I helped out a little bit at Riot, starting to help out that with that at Amazon, but I want to find ways that make it more inviting and welcoming for other folks to get into the industry, especially those who are female or non-binary, because we don't really see as much of us in the industry. And I think it would improve so much more if we had more women leaders, just more folks. Like there's so many times that I went into a room and I'm the only girl in the room. And that doesn't always feel great. I know there's such amazing smart women out there who want to be in the gaming industry but don't know how or didn't know that that was an option. And so I want to think about ways that I can tackle that, and I should have thinking about that, how to tackle that earlier when I got into the industry too.
Okay. I mean, some great advice, and also a bunch of questions that we got through, a lot of interesting topics and insights from somebody that's worked in Riot, I mean Mars as well, like Riot Games, and now Amazon. So I just want to thank you, Morgan, for being here. I know you need to go, so I'm gonna keep this brief. Thank you for joining. Love to have you on the podcast again, and I'm looking forward to when you launch your podcast next year sometime. I'll get all the links off Morgan so everyone can check out what she's doing on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, for example. They'll be in the description. And yeah, thanks, Morgan, for coming on the podcast.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Bye.
Cool. Bye.